Oh, don't be so dramatic, Maya. I just thought it would be nice to have everyone who matters to Greg in one room. You are embarrassing yourself right now. You know that? This is exactly the kind of overreacting that worries me about you two.
She was still talking, but I had already stopped listening because I was doing math in my head, and for once in my life, it had nothing to do with my job. Let me take you back. Not to the party, not yet, because the party was just the moment it finally became undeniable. The real story started years before that night, in a different kitchen, with a stack of manila folders and a woman who smiled at me like she was doing me a favor. My name is Maya. I'm 41 years old. I live in a gray colonial house on the kind of street where everyone waves from their driveways in Connecticut. I've been with my husband Greg for 13 years, married for 9. I am a licensed financial advisor. I have built my entire career on reading people, reading numbers, and knowing when something doesn't add up. It took me almost a decade to apply those skills to my own marriage. And by that, I don't mean Greg. Greg is genuinely one of the good ones. Patient, steady. He still makes me coffee without being asked and leaves it on my desk when I'm working from home. That part has never been the problem. The problem had a name, and the name was Patricia. Greg's mother, Patricia Ellison, is 68 years old, lives about 20 minutes from us in a spotless craftsman bungalow she has owned since before Greg was born, and is widely considered by everyone who knows her casually to be an absolute delight. Her book club loves her. Her church friends adore her. Her neighbors bring her tomatoes from their gardens every August. And every one of those people has seen exactly the version of Patricia she wants them to see. The version I got was a little different. It didn't reveal itself all at once. It almost never does with women like Patricia. It came in layers. Slow. Patient. Calculated in a way that's almost too careful to look calculated. I met Greg at a work event. He was in commercial real estate. I was there representing my firm. And we were together for about 8 months before he introduced me to his mother. He warned me on the drive over. He said, "She's warm, she means well, she's just very involved." He said it the way people say something is spicy when what they mean is it will set your mouth on fire. Patricia opened the door in a silk blouse and a genuine smile and said, "Oh, Maya, I have heard so many wonderful things." And I believed her. I really did. She made roast chicken. She asked me real questions about my work. She refilled my wine glass without being asked. It was a lovely evening. And then she walked me to the door at the end of the night, and while Greg was getting our coats, she put her hand on my arm and said, very gently, very sweetly, "I hope you know Greg still carries a lot from his last relationship. He's very sensitive. I just want someone who understands that about him." Now, on the surface, that sounds like a mother looking out for her son, and maybe that's all it was. But I remember driving home and Greg asking how I thought it went, and I said great, and I meant it. But something small was sitting in my chest that I couldn't name yet. I would learn, over the years that followed, to name it very precisely. The showing up unannounced started within the first year of us living together. Not constant, never constant enough that you could call it out directly, but enough. She'd be in the neighborhood, this was her phrase, and just thought she'd stop by. Didn't call first, didn't text, just knocked, and if we were home, she was in, and if we weren't, she left a bag of food on the porch with a note that always said, "Didn't want to bother you, XOP." She had opinions about my kitchen. Not stated as opinions, stated as questions. "Oh, do you not keep your pantry organized by type? I've always found it so much easier that way." She had opinions about how I dressed for family dinners. "Oh, Maya, you always look so professional. Don't you ever want to just relax a little when it's just us?" She had opinions about how much I worked. "Greg mentioned you were at the office late again. I just worry about whether you two are getting enough time together, that's all. Every one of those sentences was delivered with a smile. Every single one. And Greg, my Greg, the man I love, would hear those things and say, "She means well, that's just how she is." And I would nod and let it pass, because I didn't want to be the wife who made her husband choose between her and his mother. I know what that looks like. I know what it costs. So I smiled. I showed up to Sunday dinners. I let her refill my wine glass, and I said, "Thank you, Patricia." What I could not seem to get Greg to understand was that it wasn't any single comment. It was the accumulation. It was the fact that every comment, every little jab dressed up as concern, was aimed at the same target: me, my legitimacy, my place in her son's life. And then there was Vanessa. Vanessa Hartley, Greg's ex. They dated for 4 years in their late 20s. Broke up, amicably he always said, about 2 years before he and I met. I never had any issue with Vanessa in the abstract. People have pasts. I have a past. Greg having a serious relationship before me is not, by itself, a problem. But Patricia brought Vanessa up, regularly. Not constantly, again, never constantly enough to be undeniable, but she would mention something Vanessa had done, or a place Vanessa had taken Greg, or a recipe Vanessa used to make that Greg had loved, and she would do it in the same soft voice she used for everything else, like she wasn't doing it on purpose, like she just kept accidentally mentioning this woman in front of his wife. I told myself it wasn't intentional. Greg told me it wasn't intentional. And I moved on, because that is what you do. You move on. You focus on your marriage and your work and your life. You don't let one difficult woman define your happiness. Now, let me tell you about the money, because this part matters. This part matters a great deal to everything that comes later. I am a financial advisor. I have been licensed for 16 years. I manage retirement accounts, investment portfolios, tax-advantaged assets. It is not a hobby. It is my profession. I am good at it. About 5 years into my marriage to Greg, Patricia's longtime financial advisor retired. She called Greg about it on a Sunday evening, and I could hear her voice coming through the phone from across the room. Not what she was saying, but the pitch of it. That particular pitch of controlled worry that people use when they want to seem calm but need you to feel their distress. Greg came into the living room after and said, "Mom's guy retired. She doesn't know what to do. She's not going to go to a big bank. She doesn't trust them with strangers. And she doesn't know how to find someone new." And I said, "That makes sense. Finding a new advisor is stressful. I can give her some names." He said, "Actually, I was thinking, could you just look at what she has, just to see if everything's okay?" That is how it started, one Sunday afternoon. Greg and I drove over to Patricia's. She had coffee and those little butter cookies she keeps in a tin on her counter, and she slid a folder across the kitchen table to me like it was nothing. Like she hadn't just handed me the most personal document a person can hand someone. She looked at me, right at me, and said, "I don't like bringing strangers into my financial life, but you're family. I trust you." Family. She called me family. We looked at her accounts that afternoon, and I will tell you, it was a mess. Not a catastrophic mess. Nothing was gone, nothing was lost. But it was the kind of disorganized, fee-heavy, poorly diversified portfolio that makes a financial advisor take a long, slow breath. Her allocation hadn't been touched in years. She was carrying expense ratios she didn't need to pay. She had a whole layer of overlap in her equity positions that was costing her without her even realizing it. I restructured it. Took me about 2 weeks of evenings and 1 full Saturday. I moved her into lower fee index funds where it made sense. I got her a better allocation for her stage of life. I set up automatic rebalancing and put a monitoring system in place so nothing would drift silently. I did not charge her a cent. She said thank you. She hugged Greg. She brought us a fruit basket the following week, and from that point forward, Greg and I managed Patricia's retirement and investment accounts as an unofficial favor, year after year, free of charge, because she was family. Family. For 5 years, I reviewed her statements quarterly. I flagged a bad annuity she'd been talked into by a random salesperson at a seminar and got her out of it. I walked her through the Secure Act changes and how they affected her required minimum distributions. I sat with her at that same kitchen table and explained, more than once, what her money was actually doing. And every time, every single time, she left that table looking calmer, more settled, more secure. I want to be honest with you about something. In the beginning, I didn't do it for her. I did it for Greg. And maybe for myself, to prove something. To be the kind of daughter-in-law you couldn't argue with, couldn't dismiss. The kind who showed up and did the hard thing and never complained about it. But somewhere along the way, I started doing it because I genuinely cared about what happened to her money. Because I know what it looks like when someone retires and doesn't have what they thought they had. And I didn't want that for her. I didn't want that for Greg's mother, even when Greg's mother was making me crazy. That is the thing about me that Patricia never quite understood. The thing she maybe still doesn't understand. I showed up for her, consistently, freely, generously, not because I was naive, not because I was a pushover, but because I genuinely believed that being in a family meant you took care of the people in it, even the ones who made it hard. Now, let me tell you about the party. Greg and I have thrown a summer party every year for as long as we've been together. It started small, a few couples, some wine, somebody's playlist, and grew over the years into something I genuinely love. It's held in our backyard, which is deep and shaded by these old oak trees that make the whole space feel like somewhere else. I spend weeks thinking about the food. I make a signature cocktail every year. It is, without question, my favorite thing we do as a household. This year we were celebrating Greg's promotion. He'd been made a senior partner at his firm. A big deal. The kind of thing you want a room full of the people who love you to witness. So the party felt more significant than usual. I spent 2 weeks on the guest list. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, his work friends, my work friends, a couple of cousins on his side, a couple on mine. Patricia called 3 days before the party. She wanted to know if she could help with the guest list. Not help set up, not bring a dish, help with the guest list. I told her, gently, that the list was already set, that we had our head count and everything was confirmed. She said, Of course. I just thought there might be a few people Greg would have wanted there who hadn't been thought of." I told her we had it covered. She said, "Of course," with an exclamation point I could hear in her voice, and then she said she'd see us Saturday, and she hung up, and I stood in my kitchen with that small, unnameable thing sitting in my chest again. I should have pressed. I know that now. But you can't prove a feeling, and Patricia had never done anything this direct before. Her moves were always deniable, always softened with a smile or a concerned mother voice. This felt different. But I told myself I was being paranoid, and I went back to planning the cocktail. I had no idea that Patricia had already made a phone call I wouldn't find out about until Saturday evening, when my front door opened and the whole room shifted. The morning of the party was good, really good. Greg was in a great mood. We made breakfast together and laughed about something stupid. I can't even remember what. And I thought, this is it. This is why you do all of it. The Sunday dinners and the fruit baskets and the patience, for mornings like this one. I spent the afternoon getting everything ready. The backyard was strung with lights. I'd made a big batch of a white peach sangria and a non-alcoholic version for the people who don't drink. There was a charcuterie situation on the long table that I had been genuinely proud of. Greg kept walking through and saying, "This looks incredible," and I kept telling him to stop tasting the cheese before people arrived. People started arriving around 6. The weather held. The lights came on as the sun went down, and it looked exactly like I'd imagined it. Patricia arrived early, she always does, and she looked lovely in a blue dress, and she complimented everything and helped herself to the sangria, and I thought, okay, maybe tonight is just tonight. Maybe tonight is just good. By 7:30, the yard was full. Greg was in the middle of a group of his work friends, laughing at something, comfortable in his own life in a way that always makes me feel like everything I do is worth it. I was coming back from the kitchen with a fresh tray of bruschetta. And then the door opened. I heard it before I saw it. Not the door, that was ordinary, but the quality of the room. That very specific thing that happens when a space that was loud goes quiet in a patch. Not all at once, just a patch. A cluster of people near the entrance, where the sound dipped. I set the tray down on the table and looked up. And standing in my backyard, wearing a pale yellow sundress and looking like she had made a very sincere effort to look nice for a party she'd been told she was genuinely welcome at, was Vanessa Hartley, Greg's ex. In my yard. At my party. For my husband's promotion. I stood there for 3 full seconds and I did not move. I am good at that, at keeping my face neutral when my brain is on fire. 16 years in finance will teach you that. You learn to look calm while you are running numbers at full speed in your head. I looked at Vanessa. She looked confused, genuinely confused, the way someone looks when they walk into a room and realize immediately that something is off and they don't yet know what. She was scanning faces. Her eyes landed on mine, and she gave me a small, uncertain smile. Then the pivot, looking for Patricia. And then I looked at Patricia, who was standing near the drink table, glass in hand, watching me with the specific expression of someone waiting to see how a very controlled explosion goes off. She was smiling. The made myself cross the yard. Made myself walk to Vanessa, hold out my hand, and say hello. She shook it. Her grip was light. She said, "Maya, hi, you look great." She said it fast, the way you say something when you're already bracing. "I have to be honest with you," she said quietly, leaning in a little. "Patricia called me last week and told me this was a small family gathering and that everyone, including you, wanted me here as an old family friend. I would not have come if I had known this would upset anyone. I really wouldn't have." "I don't know what is going on," she said, "but I am going to make an excuse and leave in the next 10 minutes. I'm so sorry, Maya." I looked at her and I believed her. Completely. Vanessa had not shown up to cause trouble. Vanessa had been used. And that told me everything I needed to know about whose hands had actually done this. I thanked her for telling me. I meant it. She left about 15 minutes later. I watched her go quietly, say something brief to a few people near the gate, and slip out without a scene. Whatever else she was decent about it. I never saw her again after that night, and I bear her no ill will. Now the confrontation, slow walk to the kitchen. I found Patricia in my kitchen. She had come inside under the pretense of refilling the ice bucket. She was at my counter with her back half turned, and when I walked in and closed the door behind me, she turned around with her glass and a smile and said, "Oh, I was just getting some ice." Wife, quiet, the specific kind of quiet that precedes something permanent. I said, "Patricia, why is Vanessa here?" Wife, watching her face. She set the ice bucket down. She tilted her head. She did the thing she always does. That very slight pause where she decides which version of herself to bring into the room. And then she chose the one she usually chose with me, the one that had always worked before. The raised her chin and said, loudly enough that anyone passing outside the door could have heard it,
"Oh, don't be so dramatic, Maya. I just thought it would be nice to have everyone who matters to Greg in one room. You are embarrassing yourself right now. You know that? This is exactly the kind of overreacting that worries me about you two."
She was still talking. I had already stopped listening. I said very quietly, "We'll talk about the rest of this later." And I picked up the ice bucket and I walked back out to my party. The next hour and a half I performed. That is the only word for it. I refilled drinks, I laughed at the right moments, I stood next to my husband and watched him accept toasts from people who genuinely loved him, and I smiled. A real smile, mostly, because the love in that yard was real, while something in my chest sat very quiet and very still and waited. Patricia left without saying goodbye to me. She kissed Greg on the cheek at the gate and said something about how lovely it all was and that she'd call him in the morning. I watched from the back door. I didn't go out. Greg came inside and found me at the kitchen table, not doing anything, just sitting there with my hands around a glass of water that had gone warm. He sat down across from me. He didn't make a joke. He didn't try to explain it away. He looked at me for a moment and then he said, "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told him about the call she'd made to Vanessa. I told him what Vanessa had said to me, that she'd been told everyone wanted her there, that it was a family gathering, that she had no idea. I told him about the kitchen, about what Patricia had shouted, about the way she had looked at me while I was asking a reasonable question, the way she had chosen volume over honesty. And then I said the thing I had been holding for 9 years. "Greg, this is not about one bad moment. This is a pattern, Vanessa's name, the showing up unannounced, the comments about my job, my house, my parenting, my clothes, the constant low-grade message that I am a tolerated outsider in your family. And tonight was the first time it was this direct. Tonight she chose to humiliate me in front of every person I know, at my own party, on the night we were celebrating you." Greg was quiet for a long time, not defensive, not rushing to explain or excuse. I had said it right, I think, without accusation at him, without making it his fault, just laying it down on the table where we could both see it. And he looked at it. He really looked at it. He said, "I know. I've known something was off for a long time, and I kept calling it just how she is, because it was easier than saying what it actually is. And I'm sorry, that's on me. That should not have been on you to carry alone." I don't cry easily. I didn't cry then. But I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized had been held tight. We sat there a while longer, and then I said, "I need to talk to you about the accounts." Greg looked at me. He understood immediately what I meant. He knows my work, knows how I think, and he nodded slowly, as if he had been half expecting this sentence for a while and was finally ready to hear it. "We have been managing her retirement and investment accounts for 5 years as a personal favor," I said, "free of charge, because she said she trusted us, because she said we were family. And what she did tonight is a direct communication about what she actually thinks of my place in this family. I'm not willing to extend professional trust and free labor to someone who just used our guest list as a weapon." Greg said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to resign, formally, in writing. We tell her exactly why, we give her a clear handoff plan, and we make sure she is set up with the tools she needs to find a new advisor. But we are done managing her money." He didn't argue. He didn't say she means well. He didn't say, "Let's give it a few days." He said, "Okay, I'll be in the room when you do it. We do it together." That was the night Greg became my partner in the truest sense of the word. Not because he agreed with me, but because he stopped making me stand alone in front of his mother. What I didn't know yet was how Patricia would react when we sat down across from her, and I did not predict it correctly, not even close. The following Monday, I sat down at my home office desk, the same desk where I had spent hundreds of hours reviewing Patricia's quarterly statements, and I drafted a formal letter of resignation from our role as her informal financial managers. I did it the way I would do anything professional, clean, specific, without anger. The letter stated that after careful consideration, Greg and I were formally resigning as managers of Patricia Ellison's retirement and investment accounts, effective 30 days from the date of the letter. It stated that we would provide full documentation of all account positions, rebalancing history, and tax-sensitive holdings. It stated that we strongly encouraged her to seek a licensed financial advisor through a reputable registered investment advisor firm, and that we were happy to provide a written summary of her current situation to assist in that transition. The letter did not mention the party. The letter did not mention Vanessa. It did not need to. Patricia would know. Patricia would know exactly what she had set in motion. We asked her to come over on a Wednesday evening. We set the table in our dining room, not the kitchen, not somewhere casual. We had printed copies of the letter. We had a full transition document I'd spent 2 days preparing, account summaries, the names of 3 reputable RIA firms in her area, a list of questions she should ask any new advisor, and a note about an upcoming required minimum distribution she would need to take before year-end. She arrived at 6:30. She was wearing a cardigan and carrying a covered dish. She had made chicken soup, which is her version of an olive branch. She set it on the counter and said something about how it was still a little chilly in the evenings. Greg took her coat. I poured her water. We sat down. Patricia looked at the papers on the table. She looked at Greg. She looked at me. And something in her face shifted. Not alarm yet, wariness. The particular wariness of someone who is very good at reading rooms and suddenly doesn't like what the room is saying. Greg spoke first. I had asked him to. He said, "Mom, we need to talk to you about something important. Please let us finish before you respond." Greg narrated through Maya's perspective, tender and strong. He told her, calmly, without cruelty, that what had happened at the party was not something we were going to treat as a misunderstanding or a moment of poor judgment. He said that inviting Vanessa without our knowledge, under a false premise, at a celebration for our family, was a significant breach of our trust. He said he had been putting words like, "just how she is," on things for too long, and that he was not willing to do that anymore. Patricia opened her mouth once. Greg held up one hand, gently, and said, "Let me finish." And she closed it. I will never forget that, the way she closed her mouth. Because Greg had never done that before. Not once in 30 years of managing her feelings over his own. I slid the letter across to her. I said, "Patricia, after a lot of thought, Greg and I are formally resigning from managing your retirement and investment accounts. This has been a personal favor we have provided for 5 years, and we are no longer in a position to continue it. The letter explains everything. I've also prepared a transition packet for you. It has everything you need to get started with a new advisor." She read the first paragraph. And then she looked up at me. And for the first time in 9 years of knowing this woman, I saw something pass across Patricia's face that was not controlled, not curated. Fear. She said, "You can't be serious." Her voice was different, smaller. She looked at Greg. He looked back at her, steady, and nodded once. She tried, briefly, to make it small. She said something about how she thought we were overreacting, that this seemed like a very dramatic response to one misunderstanding, that surely we didn't need to make such a production out of it. She said dramatic again, that word she always reached for when she wanted to make me feel unhinged. I let her finish. Then I said, "I understand this feels like a big response, but it is a proportionate one. What you did at the party was intentional. We both know that. And we are not angry. We are simply drawing a boundary. The accounts will be in good hands with a new advisor. I've made sure of it." She said, "I don't know who I'd even call. I don't know these people. I've always had someone I trusted handle this." And her voice broke, just slightly, on the word trusted. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be honest about that. I felt sad in a strange way, because I had genuinely cared about her finances. I had genuinely wanted her to be okay. And now she was sitting across from me, afraid, and I was the reason. But I had not made this choice. She had. Every choice that led to this table had been hers. I spent the next 40 minutes going through the transition packet with her. Every page. I explained her current allocation. I walked her through the RMD deadline she needed to hit before December. I highlighted the 3 firms I'd recommended and explained what questions to ask. I was thorough. I was professional. I was kind. At the end of it, I said, "Patricia, you are in a good position financially. The work we've done over the past 5 years has set you up well. A good advisor will be able to take this from here without any disruption." I meant every word of that. She left with her soup and her packet of documents, and almost none of the composure she'd arrived with. She kissed Greg on the cheek at the door. She did not look at me when she said goodbye. I called. Greg closed the door and leaned against it and let out a breath that sounded like it had been in him for years. He said, "You okay?" I said, "Yeah, you?" He said, "Yeah," also kind of terrified, but yeah. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in 3 days. He pulled me in and held on, and I thought, this is what it was supposed to be. Me and him on the same side of every door. I thought the worst of it was behind us. I was not entirely right about that, because Patricia still had to find a new advisor, and Patricia, without anyone who actually knew her situation guiding her, was about to make some choices. She did not call for 3 weeks. That was the longest stretch of silence we had ever had with Patricia. Greg texted her twice, gently, just to check in, and she responded with brief, polite messages that said nothing. When she did start talking again, it was through Greg. She would call him directly, which she had always done, but now there was a new dimension to it. She was asking him questions about her money, about her accounts. He would relay them to me, and I would give him general, non-advisory answers, because I was no longer her advisor, and I had no standing to tell her what to do. It is very strange to watch someone struggle with a problem you could solve in about 4 minutes, and to know that the reason you won't solve it is entirely their own doing. She did eventually hire someone, a financial advisor at a large national brokerage, not one of the firms I'd recommended, but a walk-in from a branch near her house. Greg mentioned it in passing. He said she seemed okay with the guy. I said I was glad. What I was not glad about, what I could not warn her about because it was no longer my place, was what came about 4 months later. Greg came home one evening in early November, looking tired in a particular way. He sat down and said, "So, Mom made a move with her accounts." He said the new advisor had recommended rolling a significant portion of her investment holdings into an actively managed fund with a 1.2% expense ratio, about 4 times what she had been paying in the index structure I'd put in place. On the balance Patricia carried, a fee increase of that magnitude would cost her tens of thousands of dollars over a 10-year horizon. Not all at once, which is how these things hide. Slowly, quietly, through compounding, which is ruthless in both directions. I had spent years building her a low-cost structure specifically to protect against this kind of erosion. I said, "That's unfortunate." And I meant it. I genuinely meant it. Not as a dig, as a statement of fact. It was unfortunate. It was a bad recommendation, or at minimum a significantly more expensive one than she needed, and without someone who actually knew her situation in the room, she had no way to evaluate it. The second thing happened in December. She missed the deadline for a required minimum distribution from one of her IRAs. I had flagged that deadline in the transition packet, written it in bold with the dollar amount and the due date. The new advisor had either not caught it or not emphasized it. The IRS penalty for a missed RMD is steep. Patricia had to pay it. I am not telling you this because I am happy about it. I am telling you this because it is what happened. Because the story is about consequences, not punishment. and the consequence of losing someone who genuinely understood your financial situation, who had spent 5 years building institutional knowledge of your accounts for free because they loved your son, is that you start over with someone who is starting from scratch. Somewhere around February, Patricia called me directly. Not Greg, me. I let it ring twice before I answered. I want to be honest about that. And then I picked up. She didn't apologize. Not exactly. What she said was, she said she had been thinking a lot since our meeting, and that she understood she had done something that wasn't fair, and that she hoped, over time, things could be different. Different. Not better, not fixed. Different. Which was, honestly, probably the most accurate word for it. I said, I appreciate you saying that, Patricia. I really do. And I meant it. I told her I hoped things could be different too. I told her that what Greg and I needed, what I needed, was to feel like I was actually part of this family. Not tolerated, not managed, part of it. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I think I had some feelings about Greg and his life that I let get in the way of how I treated you. That wasn't right. It wasn't a full reckoning. It wasn't a movie apology with tears and a complete character reversal. But it was real. It was the most real thing she had ever said directly to me. I said, I know. And I think we can find our way to something better. But it's going to take time. She said she understood. Things between Patricia and me are different now. Not perfect, not transformed, but genuinely different. She doesn't show up unannounced anymore. She doesn't mention Vanessa. She asks me questions about my work sometimes, real questions, the kind that show she's actually curious. We are not close in the way I once hoped we might be. Real, not wrapped in a bow. But I am no longer performing. That is the thing. I don't sit at her Sunday dinners with something braced in my chest. I don't navigate her comments with the same constant low-grade vigilance. I can be in a room with her now and feel, not warm, not always, but honest. Like we both know the truth of what happened and we are choosing, together, to try anyway. Back to the accounts, the permanent decision. She found a new advisor, someone who came recommended by a colleague of hers. A woman, as it happens, who actually specializes in retirement income planning. Greg says Patricia seems to like her. I am glad. I mean that without any irony. She will pay more for her financial management than she ever paid when Greg and I were doing it for free. That is simply true. And I hope it goes well for her. I hope her money grows and her retirement is comfortable, and that the woman she hired catches every deadline and every opportunity I used to catch. What I learned from all of this, what I keep coming back to, is that trust and access are not separable things. You cannot treat someone like a valued professional when you need their expertise, and like an outsider when they try to hold a seat at your table. That's not how any of this works. Not in finance, not in families. I showed up for Patricia for years. Free, consistent, genuinely caring about what happened to her future. And she looked at that, at all of that, and thought she could invite my husband's ex to my party and that I would swallow it the same way I had swallowed everything else. She was wrong. Greg and I are good, really good. Better than before, actually, because there are no longer things sitting unspoken between us. He asked, a few months after everything settled, whether I regretted resigning from her accounts. I thought about it honestly. I said no. Not because I was still angry, I wasn't, not really, but because the resignation was the first moment in 9 years that I had treated my own labor the way I ask every client to treat theirs, as something with real value, something that deserves to go where it is respected. My name is Maya. I'm 41 years old. I live in a gray colonial house in Connecticut with a man who finally learned to stand beside me. And I still make an excellent sangria. And the summer party this year, smaller, quieter, Just the people we love most was the best one we have ever thrown. Wife, the very last line, warm and final. It did not require a guest list from anyone else.